So let's take a look at Kierkegaard's The Sickness Unto Death. What a title. It'll be something you'll understand once you're through with this book. About the preface, I just briefly like to say, call your attention to one thing, and that's here on page 35. Kierkegaard starts talking about Christian heroism. This is a very Christian book. Christian heroism, he says, and indeed one perhaps sees little enough of that, is to risk unreservedly being oneself, an individual human being, this specific individual human being, alone before God, alone in this enormous exertion and this enormous accountability. Just that very brief statement. I was going to say simple statement there. Perhaps it's not so simple. There is a lot there in terms of telling you kind of what Kierkegaard is getting at. To risk being yourself is a very important idea in this book. And one may say, well, that's the easiest thing in the world. I mean, I am myself, so what else could I be? Well, yes and no. Yes and no. It's dialectical, and that's a word that you'll come to know. In one sense, we are always ourselves. And in another sense, we're not. It's dialectical. I mean, it depends. When you say that something's dialectical, the same thing is sort of true and not true. Yes, we're always ourself, but we're not always ourself. Um, Being a self for Kierkegaard is something that you need to achieve. Being your own individual self to to, to do that. And why it's so difficult to be yourself, to be the self that you are, is that's a lot of what the book is about. There's a lot here when he says the specific individual human being alone before God. That is what makes everything so complicated. For Kierkegaard, as we'll see, to be a human being is to be in the presence of God. Um, and to be a self is to somehow come to terms with being before God. And see the way he characterizes it being alone before God in this enormous exertion and this enormous accountability. There's all sorts of religious views, there's all sorts of versions of Christianity, and people have different ideas of it. For Kierkegaard, being a Christian is no easy task. Not at all. And it's not always happy being a Christian. Being a Christian makes life harder. I mean, obviously, there's this huge reward, and we'll see what he thinks the reward is. But he calls it an exertion and an accountability. So the human being who realizes they're in the presence of God, which for Kierkegaard is the Christian, is very different in their outlook from other human beings. They've taken on a big task, and much of this book is the story of the unfolding of that task, where the individual human being goes through all of the difficulties and the twisty journey of becoming themselves, which means basically becoming a self in the presence of God, accepting who one is and what God wants of one, I'd say.